Thank you very much, Kanag Dikshitju. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You heard a very generous introduction of me just a while ago, and his introduction must have raised your expectations of me this evening. And the very fact that you have paid to come here and listen to my lectures, about which I didn't know, shows that you have very high expectation of me. But let me admit that I've come here as an academic retreat, being fed up of the administrative work that I do from morning till evening for 12 hours every day. And I'm on actually academic sabbatical for the past 3 years or so. For the past 3 years or so, I don't think I've read more than 2 or 3 books intensively. Maybe cursorily, maybe I've read about half a dozen books. And academics is something that I was always longing for and always wanted to be back. But somehow, since I accepted this assignment of running a university for 5 years, I'm counting the remaining 2 years or so of my vice-chancellorship. And I've also started writing an autobiography, the title of which is In Service of Triviality, Autobiography of a Vice-Chancellor. You might wonder what a Vice-Chancellor does. It's such trivial things that he has to do every day, day in and day out. And I thought that this would be a nice opportunity for me to take a retreat. And I'm really thankful for giving me this opportunity to Dipakju, who gave me this opportunity and also this honor to address you this evening. I'm also thankful to Kanagju for introducing me so lavishly in front of you, about which I'm a little embarrassed. Only one, though we know each other for almost 3 decades now. I think one fact that I haven't said with him, and I would like to say it this evening, is this: that I was born in Nepal, in a village called Bagha, in Tanka Subba district. That village belongs to my mother, and I was born in my mother's village. And at the age of 2.5 years, I was taken to India, where my father was from. My father was from Kalimpong, if you know, of Darjeeling district. He came to Nepal to teach in schools, and the first school where he got a job was in Bagha. And my maternal grandfather was a pretty rich person, so he had established a school of his own. And my father came to teach in Nepal very early. I think he came here in 1952, Gregorian calendar, and that's where he met my mother, and I was born here. And of course, I'm an Indian citizen, but I can also say Nepalese origin, not just Nepali origin. And being on sabbatical and being out of touch with books, in fact, I collect a lot of books, but I give them away to various institutions. And being away from active academics, or even say passive, in fact, my lecture this evening has no surveillance. There are no footnotes and references because I'm not able to put them to collect those references. The title of my presentation is based on Michael Hurt's article titled Being Nepali Without Nepal. I don't even remember which year it was published, but where it was published, but I vaguely remember having read this article several years ago. And but the content is quite different from what I remember about this article. And the content runs almost straight from my heart rather than from my head. And if it sounds like Salmon's incantation, please bear with me. And this is not, as I said, this is not really going to be a very rigorous, as Kanak was saying, academic exercise. I took this opportunity to run away from my routine work. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would, in order to be precise and to limit myself to a given time, I would like to read out slowly for the benefit of all of you. And if you have any queries, I would be most happy to answer them. I normally hate to listen to people who read out. I don't like it myself. But what I'm presenting is what I could quickly type out last weekend. And I was actually hoping to get another opportunity to read through what I had typed out, but somehow I didn't get the time. It's still very raw, but if I present it the way I would like to present, I might slip on many issues. So, since what I'm going to speak here may also be reported, it's better that I stick to what I've written rather than what I might say. And when I just give kind of a classroom lecture, then I tend to sometimes take more time than is desirable. I might be saying a couple of contentious issues for which, if you ask me for evidence at the moment this evening, I'll not be able to give you evidence. Let me make that also very clear. But if you want them badly, I can search, I can find them, and then send them over to you later. So the topic is Nepalis without Nepal. Means I hope this expression is clear. Migration, livelihood, and identity. For almost 2 centuries, the youths of Nepal were lured to emigrate to almost every part of the world. First by Gallawalas, hired by the British to fulfill their ever-increasing need for soldiers, and later lured by the stories of gold fruiting on tea bushes of Darjeeling. Chiako butama sun falcha bhanera Nepalma prachalit bhaisakeko थियो. They also emigrated to work in construction sites, quarries, cinchona plantations, and agricultural fields of Darjeeling, Sikkim, Himalayas. Broadly speaking, those who left Nepal the earliest were Dalits. I hope this expression is also clear to you, who were followed by Janajatis. And the last category of people to migrate from Nepal to Darjeeling, Sikkim, Himalayas were Tagadharis. I'm using these 3 expressions which are now, I think, quite commonly understood, not just in Nepal but also elsewhere. I can see some scholars from outside, but I think they would also find these 3 expressions not difficult to understand. And I'm using this quite often in my presentation. This happened because most Tagadharis were not only socially and ritually, but also economically and politically privileged people in Nepal, giving them no big reason to emigrate. There are all indications to show that they began to migrate in any substantial number to places like Assam, Darjeeling, and Sikkim only towards the end of the 19th century. This theory of mine is based on the evidence about high socioeconomic and political status of Tagadharis in Nepal and their relatively marginal status in the Darjeeling, Sikkim, Himalayan region, where most early immigrants from Nepal have settled. My ethnography of Darjeeling and Sikkim Himalayas also shows that many Matwali Nepalis had bought their lands from Nepali Dalits. In Nepal, bureaucrats, doctors, engineers, and professors were almost solely drawn from Tagadaris, as shown by the Cameron, Blakey, and Sadden. Here, there are strong reasons to believe that Tagadaris are of Indian origin. But to say, as did Dorbadra Bistra in his book titled Fatalism and Development, that their culture is alien to Nepal, is perhaps pushing the claim a little too far. As a practicing anthropologist, he was expected to know that cultures adapt to local environments, even when such cultures belong to the dominant class. Due to lack of sustained reinforcement from India, which was due to lack of quick and easy means of communication, their culture went through a massive adaptation to Nepal, which in the long run made their culture quite different from Indian culture. Many Matwali youths migrated with the aim of earning enough cash to free their lands and gold jewelries from mortgage in the hands of the moneylenders, who were almost invariably Tagadaris. The economic condition of Tagadaris, however, gradually deteriorated as their landholding size decreased, mainly due to proliferation of population triggered by polygynous marriages in practice among them. Many Tagadari youths were free during lax agricultural seasons to migrate to neighboring Indian Himalayas for trying their hands on small-time trade or harvesting of cash crops like orange and cardamom. Such seasonal forays often led to longer-term migration with or without their families. But by the time they began to migrate to the adjoining Himalayan region, most of the economic niches like tea plantation, agriculture, and armed services were already controlled by Matwali Nepalis. Thus, it is perhaps necessary to revisit the theory that speaks about racial preference of the British in recruiting the Matwali Jats like Magar and Gurung from western Nepal and Rai and Lembu from eastern Nepal. Although the British reportedly suspected Tagadaris to be loyal to India due to their Indian origin, I am of the view that Tagadari youths were not available for recruitment during 19th century. They had better things to do in Nepal, such as priesthood, money lending, bureaucracy, judiciary, higher education, etc. Only very few Tagadaris migrated to India in the first half of the 19th century. Thus, when Tagadari Nepalis began to leave Nepal, which was roughly towards the end of the 19th century, the only major niche available to them was dairying. Although within this niche, there was a transformation of these people from Khuntiwalas to Gwalas during the 20th century. Land was available for cultivation, even for Tagadaris, but it was in relatively remoter part of northeast India. But soon some of them became prosperous, and at least one Upadhyay Bahun from Assam came in close contact with Mahatma Gandhi, the father of Indian nation, and participated actively in freedom movement of India, though he never got that recognition. While others contributed to the development of terrace farming and dairying in different parts of Indian Himalayas. After the arrival of Tagadaris in Indian Himalayas, the Nepali, Dalits, and Matwalis went through a religious revivalism as they began to participate in bhajans, kirtans, and pujas on regular basis, and established temples in their localities. There were no temples in Nepali localities till the Tagadaris came and settled among them. They also started their own schools and caste panchayats to deal with intercaste and marital disputes that were on the rise due to multi-caste villages and tea gardens. Thus, there emerged a Nepali/Gorkha community with a distinct identity as a Hindu community outside Nepal. Such a development, however, reversed the outward orientation of the earlier settled Matwali Nepalis, which had brought them close to the local communities, to inward orientation. One of the results of this reversal of orientation was the weakening of ties with the local communities in the region, which was nurtured by Matwali Nepalis for several decades on the basis of their common food habits, temperaments, and looks. As a fallout of the anti-foreigners movement spearheaded by All Assam Students' Union, the local people began to nurture anti-Nepali feelings and even physically evicted them from several parts of India's northeast in 1980s and 1990s and captured their land and property. An almost similar development took place in Bhutan. The Matwali Lotsampas, or the southern Bhutanese Nepalis as they were called, did not have a strong loyalty to religious practices of the Tagadaris, the Nepali language or the Nepali dress. They had no issues about wearing the national dress of Bhutan, but Tagadari Lotsampas, who saw themselves as guardians of Nepali language and culture, did not like the imposition of national dress on them. But they failed miserably because of lack of mature leaders and lack of support from international community. Friends, as you all know, every evicted Nepali who arrived at Kakarvita was given refuge by Nepal. This sent the following message to Nepalis without Nepal: that they cannot do without Nepal, that they need Nepal in times of crisis, even if they may not remember the country in times of prosperity and happiness, which I think is also a point made by Michael Hurt in his article titled Being Nepali Without Nepal. Some Nepalis from Northeast India bought some lands in Nepal with the help of their relatives just in case they are forced to flee India. This fear is more in areas where they are in minority than in areas like Darjeeling and Sikkim, because the chances of their being evicted from places like Darjeeling and Sikkim are non-existent. However, the leaders of the movement for a separate statehood in West Bengal have always argued that they may be evicted one day, like their brethren from Assam and Meghalaya. One of the reasons why the Gorkhaland movement was violent was due to transferred anger about their eviction from India's northeast, which was and still is used by leaders as the justification for demand of a separate homeland called Gorkhaland. Until the first eviction of Nepalis from India's northeast took place in 1980, they wanted to identify themselves as Indian Nepalis, Bharatiya Nepali, or Indian Gorkhas, Bharatiya Gorkha. They underplayed their historical, linguistic, and cultural connection with the people of Nepal. They tried to distance themselves even from the literary icons of Nepal like Bhanuvakta and Devkota. They highlighted the dialectical differences between Nepal Nepalis and Indian Nepalis and described the Nepal Nepalis as Jhaldoke Nepalis, because Jhal and Dhoka, these are not words used by Indian Nepalis. Even the bust of poet Bhanuvakta in Darjeeling was broken, and Bhanu Jayanti, which was earlier celebrated with a lot of fanfare, was replaced by Agam Singh Giri Jayanti. Indeed, most of them had not seen Nepal, and the bedtime stories of Nepal had begun to fade. They were born in India, went to Indian schools, and were obviously taught Indian history and Indian languages. It was only in 20th century that they got the permission to use Nepali language as a medium of instruction in the hill areas of Darjeeling, first at the primary level and slowly further up. This was a phase of disengagement with Nepal and ownership of Indian national identity, as if both could not happen at the same time. This was a phase in which Nepalis without Nepal, particularly those living in India, decided to make a deliberate choice for Indian nationality and express it in their poetry, fiction, political demands, etc. They needed to assert themselves as Indians because they were often called immigrants and foreigners. The reason for adopting Gorkha over Nepali by various political parties like All India Gorkha League, Gorkha National Liberation Front, and Gorkha Janamukti Morcha is precisely this desire to be included in the Indian nationhood and to be separated from Nepalese nationality. But sadly, the tiny intellectual class of Darjeeling has rarely been engaged by the leaders of the movement for separate statehood, who would otherwise not choose one nomenclature over another for the sake of being recognized as Indian nationals. At this juncture, allow me to mention an anecdote. In 2010, when some of us in Shillong toyed with the idea of organizing an international conference on Nepali diaspora, for which some of my hosts here were also present. Indo-Nepali scholars objected to the use of the word diaspora. They said, "Are we a diasporic society?" I was asked, expecting me to say no. I knew that their concern behind this question, that they would be, Indo-Nepalis would be further confirmed as migrants from Nepal and further deprived of whatever rights they had. But that concern was exactly what we wanted to bring to the fore at the conference we held in November 2011, which was attended by some of you. We wanted to tell the world that here is a community which is suffering from an acute sense of insecurity due to their fuzzy national identity. The historical fact that India itself is a land of migrants gives them little solace. The fact that their language is now one of the national languages of India also gives them little comfort in the face of violent evictions they've experienced in the recent past. But they also know that they have no land in Nepal where they could go back to and build a house. They really have nowhere to go. The only option for them is to find their niche within the huge country called India, as many other communities from different directions have done. Sooner they realize this, the better. The Janajati movement that swept Nepal and Eastern Himalayas in 1990s gave a different twist to the relationship between Nepalis and Indian Nepalis. The Indian Nepalis, who sought every possible way of distancing themselves from Nepalis in order to be accepted as Indians, had largely forgotten their own languages, cultures, and religions, and embraced the generic Nepali Hindu identity. But their desire to be recognized as scheduled tribes would not be fulfilled unless they knew about their traditional dresses, languages, festivals, rituals, food habits, etc. So they sent groups of people from Darjeeling and Sikkim to Nepal to document their true, quote-unquote, true language, culture, and tradition, come back and propagate them among the members of their respective communities in Darjeeling and Sikkim. For some communities, the process is still on. Thus, there was a need to know their languages, cultures, and traditions, which brought them closer to Nepalis. The Janajati movement also inspired the Dalits and Madhesis in Nepal, till the Maoists appropriated most Janajati demands and held the country to ransom for more than a decade since 1990s. The Janajati movement had an almost sudden exit from Nepal, but the same continued among Nepalis without Nepal for much longer duration. The Janajati movement was considered divisive and would bring an end to the organic Nepali society, but end it did not. As a matter of fact, it was soon reinforced by the Prasant Tamang phenomenon in mid-2000, and more recently the killer earthquake of 25th April 2015. The support for Prasant Tamang's candidature for Indian idolship came not only from Nepalis without Nepal, but also Nepalis within Nepal. Similarly, the Nepali-speaking areas of Darjeeling and Sikkim contributed a lot more heartily than non-Nepali-speaking areas of India towards funds for earthquake victims of Nepal recently. The Sikkim itself sent, I think, more than 20 trucks of articles at different points of time. My theory about the hesitation, and in some cases even refusal, to own the fact that the roots of Nepalis outside Nepal lie in Nepal is because Nepal has not yet emerged as a country worth reckoning. It has almost no existence in the world of art, literature, music, sports, and most importantly today, the cricket. Its fame in bravery and war fields is considered to be of no use to modern warfare, which I don't think is an informed view. Its economy cannot move without the remittances made by Nepalis working away from the country, often under humiliation and even risks to their lives. Why then would Nepalis without Nepal own Nepal? They would certainly own it, if it was one of the developed countries like Germany and America. If that was the case, the attitude of Nepalis without Nepal towards Nepal would be different. And they would proudly say that they come from that great country called Nepal. In this world of commodification, even one's nation is commodified. Disowning Nepal and owning India was quite clear from the Second World War onwards till 1970s, when a series of incidents, including terming Nepali language as a foreign language by none other than a serving Prime Minister of India, when he was met by a delegation of Nepalis demanding inclusion of the Nepali language in the 8th schedule of the Indian Constitution. Of all incidents, this one jolted the Indian Nepalis like never before, and it led to instant protests on the streets of Darjeeling. The Indian Nepalis suddenly felt that no matter how many lives they sacrificed for defending the country called India, no matter how much loyalty they showed towards the country called India, they were never accepted as an Indian community. Come 1980s and 1990s, this feeling was further entrenched when the Indian government did nothing to stop the evictions from Northeast India and Bhutan. The only contribution of the Indian government was to facilitate transportation of the evicted people from Northeast India and Bhutan to the border town of Nepal called Kakarvita. Nepal government also kept quiet about evictions throughout 1980s and 1990s, when the Nepalis were evicted from Northeast India and Bhutan. Although some Indian Nepalis were glad that Nepal did not say anything, because they thought that raising the issue by Nepal would weaken their claims of nationality in India and Bhutan. Other Nepalis considered themselves as people on no man's land, or as children abandoned by both the parents, namely India and Nepal. Some in India also thought that if Nepal had raised objection to such evictions as violation of the Indo-Nepal Friendship Treaty of 1950, which it was, the objection would be picked up by the world media and there would be pressure from international community on India and Bhutan to at least treat the evictees as human beings and not as herds of animals, which was how they were treated. The Nepalese government even failed to negotiate with Bhutanese government for the return of the Bhutanese refugees to their own soil. The only time Nepal made a protest was when Nepalis living in a small and remote village called Langpi, located on the border between Meghalaya and Assam in the northeast of India, was served quit notice by some local organizations. Sometimes in the end of 2010 or early 2011, the government of India swung into action and the eviction was averted. I think the Minister for External Affairs, government of Nepal, made a phone call to, I think, her counterpart in India. We all know that Nepal allowed the Bhutanese refugees to be spread all over Europe and America and let them live in lands whose laws they did not know, whose language they did not understand, and whose rules did not permit them to perform some of their vital rituals involving blood sacrifice. They could not even burn a bunch of incenses to please their gods and goddesses because the fire alarm would be triggered. The young boys and girls seem happy, but with the older generation feeling completely out of place and away from their ancestral spirits, gods and goddesses, only time will tell if they can maintain a level of sanity and direction. Remapping their society has started, including their age-old social boundaries. But the Nepalis planted in those countries need a lot of support of us to strike roots in order to sustain themselves economically, socially, and culturally. Nepalis have not only been evicted physically from India's northeast, but also discriminated and exploited there. The immigration checkposts in Banihat in Meghalaya and Srirampur Hat in Assam asked every Nepali traveling by bus to come out and show the proofs of their identity, and even those who had proofs were harassed until bribe was paid. This harassment continued till early 2000, when one Nepali lawyer of Assam successfully moved the Guwahati High Court to declare stopping Nepalis from coming to Northeast India as illegal. While this is illegal, it continues as the state administration turns a blind eye to such illegal acts. Similarly, some local bodies even stop them from entering Meghalaya or evict them from coal mining areas of Jaintia hills of the state. There are other kinds of harassment and discrimination they face on daily basis. The village headmen called Gaon Buras, who are very powerful in areas under 6th schedule to Indian Constitution, do not permit them to make pakka houses and do not issue no objection certificates to them for various purposes, even if the child is born there and the parents are Indian citizens. They do not get state government jobs and they are not allowed to carry out trades in their own names. Finally, all this is gradually driving Indian Nepalis from northeast India to settle in Siliguri en route to Nepal. Thus, it appears that the cycle of migration is going to be completed soon. While the world is growing increasingly intolerant of the people who have different looks, habits, manners, nationalities, etc., and nation states witness them helplessly, the future for marginalized Nepalis without Nepal looks bleak. There are two possibilities for them in the near future. One, there will be more return migration to Nepal, creating further stress on the limited resources and livelihood opportunities in the country, which may even lead to unrest or civil war of sorts in Nepal. The other possibility is further degeneration in the living conditions of Nepalis without Nepal, further violation of their human rights, and further alienation from the soil they nurtured with their blood and sweat. In either case, Nepalis without Nepal have to prepare themselves for a greater challenge to their life, livelihood, and identity in future, for they neither have the security of life like Nepalis within Nepal, nor do they have the security of honor, dignity, and identity outside Nepal. Thank you all for your patient hearing.
Thank you, Tanka. And you've given me my answer, and it is in that sentence that the future of Nepalis in India is, in your words, bleak, and that it will have an impact for the Nepalis of Nepal, but first and foremost it will have an impact on the livelihood and lifestyles and human rights of the Nepalis of India. Delivered, you may have written it over a weekend, but it was a stream of consciousness presentation that comes from your heart with all the scholarly background that you do have. So thanking you for this presentation, including the very sobering end which a scholar of your stature has presented to this very important audience. I think that message will go deep and far for all the kinds of responses that an intellectual community might have to take for a message such as that. With that, let me open the floor for questions. There are microphones out there, and hands up. Okay, right up in the front, David Gellner, and then I'll move on backward. Over here, Eta.
You've concentrated on Nepalis in the northeast. Could I just invite you to contrast their position with, on the one hand, the many thousands of Nepalis who've been settled for decades in Delhi, and also, on the other hand, those Nepalis who continued migrating over the border into Myanmar?
This is on, but I'm not sure. Sunundesh? Okay. That precisely because I wanted to focus on the Himalayas one, and the other is my lack of knowledge on places like Delhi and Myanmar. I have some idea about Nepali migration to Myanmar, but in early 19th century, but I really don't know much about it. It's all based on secondary readings. So I sort of decided to focus only on Darjeeling, Sikkim, and the further northeast India.
I might just add that possibly the Nepali speakers in the Delhi area tend to be Nepali citizens from Nepal going over, and Professor Subba's concentration was on the Indian Nepalis and their challenges. But the point you made, David, about increased flows into Myanmar, Burma, would be interesting to talk for anybody in the audience afterwards, I think, because you seem to know some information that some of us may not have. Very important. Professor Yadav. Eta.
Thank you. I wish to commend you on a very nice present. Working? Is it working? Yeah? All right. What actually, this is a point of information that I wish to seek from you. You might have an answer to that. I find it rather puzzling as a linguist to see speakers of Rai and Limbu, Lepcha, all en masse shifting to a dominant language of Nepal, embracing Nepali as their language when they go to places like Darjeeling or Kalimpong. When did that mass scale of bilingualism occur? Because what I know is up until 1770, if Kumar Pradhan is right, and I have gone through the archival document as well, the Kirats were communicating with other Kirats, not in Limbu, not in Rai, but in Maithili. Also to the Mahanthas in Janakpur and Matiani in the medium of Maithili. All these letters have been published by the National Archive. I find it puzzling to all of a sudden assume that how could this occur at a mass scale? I mean, after all, even in Tarai, for a number of years now, speakers of Nepali and Maithili or Bhojpuri have been cohabiting together. But bilingualism at a mass scale hasn't occurred yet. Would you wish to respond to that?
I'll just say quickly that bilingualism, in the case of many migrants to India, had already developed before they migrated to India, in Nepal itself. But it became more entrenched after they migrated to India because Indian settlements, Nepali settlements in India, were all multi-caste, multi-ethnic settlements. Even a small village of 80 families would have at least 16 different caste or ethnic groups. So this diversity of social composition forced everyone to adopt a common language called Nepali. So they became bilingual, though many of them, when they migrated at the time, when they migrated initially, they didn't know the Nepali language. My own great-grandfather and even my grandfather actually knew very few words of Nepali. And when he spoke in Nepali, we had to correct him. Baji, yesto bhannu hudain, यसरी भन्नुपर्छ. So my grandmother I've never heard her speak in Nepali. She always spoke in Limbu language. That's why when I was small, I knew my language. But as I grew up, as I moved out of my village, I lost touch with my language. But my grandfather and grandmother, they spoke only in Limbu. And they couldn't say ghar also, they always said ghar. Ghar, they could not pronounce as ghar. They could not pronounce many of the words they picked up later.
यता पछाडिपट्टि सबैजना मौन रहने विचार गर्नुभयो हो हजुर उता अनि त्यसपछि यहाँ हजुर कृष्णजी
It's great to listen Professor Subba's lecture again. We met in London. I'd like to remind you from the Center for Nepali Studies UK. My name is Krishna.
What's your name, please? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, about this historical fact and also about the British preference of the the martial rate not being correct. I think this idea comes now is something very new. What has been established that there has been preference by Britain to recruit who in the military force. I'm not sure about the tea company and all the things. The particular groups were preferred, and quite recently, I think within last 5 years or 10 years, the rule has been changed, and everybody's welcome now there in the to be recruited in the British Army. And also other thing about the Tagadari in the historically speaking about, many people tend to think that they were engaged in the priesthood, judiciary, bureaucracy kind of things. But I think this is also not true. The large number of the the Brahmins and Kshatris were the peasants, and many people have written about this. I think these are two things. Maybe we need clarification. Thank you.
That was a comment, I believe. Thank you. Yes.
There's a disagreement.
Yeah, disagreement. Yes.
And my information is based on, of course, the books which have been published on Nepal already.
Okay. Eta. Cholagai.
I'm Keshav Prasad Cholagai. 2 years before, I had traveled from Sikkim to Manipur to study the situation of the insurgency and effect within the Nepalese community. And I found that, and I have already mentioned in my books also, I penned it today. So what is the role of Sikkim University to minimize the insurgency and restore the peace and security in the northeast? Academically.
We have a department called Department of Peace and Conflict Studies and Management, which is exactly focusing on these issues. But our activities are more focused on trying to understand why these conflicts have taken place rather than what solutions could be suggested. I think our research hasn't reached the level of taking a policy decision or taking a policy recommendation for the nation state. So, but work is going on these issues.
If I would be allowed by the audience a quick question. Your reference to the organicness of Indian Nepali society and how it has had its highs and lows, and the Prashant Tamang phenomenon and the Nepal earthquake phenomenon. I'd like to ask you how much of this organicity is, if that's a word, has been weakened by the fact that Darjeeling and Sikkim have exactly the same demography, but Sikkim is coddled by the center, in my understanding, and Darjeeling is left to fend for itself in West Bengal with all its internal crises, which you know so well. So is there one reason that the so-called Nepali Indian is not able to come together is that there is no real state that would be a Nepali state, because Sikkim of course is a quote-unquote Nepali state, but it is adjacent to Darjeeling, which is of the same demography but kept out of in the cold.
I don't think it has to do with social composition actually, or the organic nature of the society. I think society remains organic in both Sikkim and Darjeeling. But the people are not able to come together for a common state. It's basically the people of Darjeeling are keen, but the people of Sikkim don't want it because the people of Darjeeling, the population of Darjeeling is double the population of Sikkim. And in formation of any government, population size matters. So they see that in the foreseeable future, Sikkim will not be having the chief minister. The chief minister will always come from Darjeeling. So this is basically, and we also discussed, in fact, at in some forums that we can do some kind of contract saying that the first chief minister maybe from Sikkim, the second chief minister from Darjeeling, third from Sikkim, fourth from again Darjeeling. It didn't work out. We tried all kinds of possibilities to bring Sikkim and Darjeeling together. Politically, socially they are one. And there are also a lot of intermarriages going on between Sikkim and Darjeeling. But politically, to bring them together is something very, very difficult.
But does that not weaken then the larger Nepali Indian community?
I don't think it does. And most of the people who are working in Sikkim are from Darjeeling. Because when Sikkim became a part of India in 1975, there were hardly countable few graduates, forget about postgraduates in Sikkim. So all the schools had to be managed by teachers from Darjeeling. All the offices had to be managed by people from Darjeeling. And in fact, there was a huge migration of people from Darjeeling to Sikkim between 1975 and 1980. Is real, indeed, huge. And this is the reason why when you have Dasai or Tihar festivals, Sikkim is completely deserted. Everybody goes back to Kalimpong or Darjeeling.
Rajendra Pradhan and then Deepak. I think we have time for about 2 or 3 more questions and then we should end.
Professor Subba, I was wondering, what would your analysis look like?
Sorry?
What would your analysis look like if you studied and included in your study Nepalis, not only from the hills, who migrate to India, but also Nepalis from Madhya, from Tarai? Would there be a difference in your analysis? If you include in your study Nepalis from Tarai.
Okay, Deepak has a similar, an add-on question to that, complementary.
You see, in Nepal we struggle with this word Nepalis from India, and we've had this discussion previously also. And it's very easy for someone like you to say that you are Nepalis because you're an Indian and you can say you're a Nepali. We in Nepal have to qualify you as of Nepali origin, and that's also questionable, and that relates to Rajendra's point about what do you do about people. Well, let's take an example like Anmol Prasad, who is obviously his name suggests that he is not of Nepali origin, but he is a Nepali out there, which relates to the question of what makes a Nepali in a place like Darjeeling, because you have indigenous Bhutias and Lepchas, but who are also closely aligned to the Gorkhaland movement and who identify as Nepalis and who are either coddled or discriminated against by the state. That's one question. The other is you mentioned the trend to look for your roots because everyone was seeking the ST status, which the Bhutias and Lepchas already had. So did it bring any kind of schism within the larger Nepali community? Because obviously Thagadaris can't claim this similar status in India.
So let me firstly go back specifically to the first part of Deepak's question and Rajendra's core question, which is how would your analysis differ if you dealt with the fact that Nepali citizens of Nepal who happen to be Madhesis, plains people, who have crossed the border and gone in, how would that change your analysis and your presentation?
I would personally think that I think very few Madhesis or Tarai Basis have crossed Nepal to the and settled in Indian on the Indian side of the border. I would, however, think that the community in Nepal called Madhesis or Tarai Basis, whatever you call them, their future is umbilically connected to the future of what I call Indian Nepalis. Any pressure on the Madhesis in Nepal would have a reflection on how the Indian government will treat us, and vice versa. If how we are treated in India will have a very close connection or a dependent connection with how they are treated in Nepal, and vice versa. I think their fate is umbilically connected. There's something that I would like to say, and therefore the study of Indian Nepalis would perhaps not be complete politically if we do not include the Indians of Nepalese origin.
Indians, Nepalis of Indian origin.
Nepal is of Indian origin, and Indians of Nepali origin, I would say, which may be objectionable to some of the Madhesis. But their fate, I hope you understand that the people, basically the Tarai dwellers and the Indian Nepalis, they have a very closely connected fate. To briefly reply to Deepak Ji's question, I didn't get the second one, but the first one about Lepchas, Bhutias and Nepalis, though there was a slogan called Lepcha, Bhutia, Nepali, Hami Sabai, Gorkhali, during that Gorkhaland movement, I don't think it was really bought by Lepchas and Bhutias. Lepchas, Bhutias, and also many Marwaris and Biharis, they supported the movement apparently wholeheartedly, but if you speak to them, if you can really win their trust and talk to them, it was more external show of solidarity or support. Internally, from deep inside, I don't think any one of them supported the movement from their heart, because somehow they have not been, the word Gorkhali or Nepali, whichever word you use, somehow doesn't include Lepchas and Bhutias among the local people, and also the Marwadis, Biharis, etc. Somehow that sense of inclusion is not there. Is not provided by these words called Gorkhali or Nepali. So it's more external show of support out of fear, out of intimidation by young boys who come and thrash them off if they don't support. It's not the support coming from deep inside the heart. And sorry. And the Lepchas and Bhutias, for whatever historical reasons, they don't really consider themselves to be Nepalis.
Thank you. This is sort of a political question, Professor Subba. I'm from Bhojpur, and the place you studied, you're doing your the book. The place called is Chinamaku. And I have also read your book, and I'm relating to this, your movement things, with current state of Nepal. You said there are some kind of effect of the Janajati movement in Nepal to the eastern Himalayas. And how do you think about this movement now in Nepal, sort of turning to bigger and bigger, and which has become one of the what you call it? If people are supporting it, and then they see it's their rights movement, and if people are against it, they are seeing it's a separatist movement like that. And how do you foresee the diasporic society and the current state of the federalism in Nepal? Thank you.
They come together.
My name is.
If I may just quickly answer, because I tend to forget the next question. I remember the first or only the last. Regarding the Janjati movement, in one of the seminars which was organized here quite some years ago, I don't remember, I think Social Science Baha was there or not, but in that seminar I had presented a paper called Reservation in India, in India, Lessons for Nepal, in which I had argued what were the problems with the affirmative policies of India, government of India, and why those policies, that kind of policies based on on ethnicity, on affirmative action, should be avoided by Nepal. That was my major argument in one of the seminars organized here, probably in a hotel, because I don't remember going out of that hotel for the entire period because there was bane in Kathmandu. That's the year I don't remember, but I remember spending all the 3 days or 4 days in a hotel and going back from the hotel straight away. But that's in that seminar, I had pleaded basically that Nepal should evolve its own policies as far, if at all it wants to have some affirmative policies. Otherwise, the way affirmative policies are run by Government of India, they are not functioning. They are not serving the purpose of the socially excluded categories of people. This is what I was trying to say. It doesn't really help the scheduled tribes, doesn't help the scheduled caste, doesn't really help the other backward classes.
Now this will be the last question, and then we'll just have a wrap up. Yes.
My name is Amulya Tuladhar. Professor Subba, I'd like to take you back a little bit to 200 to 300 years back on the differences between Nepal, as we understand it, the present borders, as well as the Sikkim, Darjeeling area, sort of treating them as two different populations, two different control groups, and what's happening these days in identity and all that type of stuff. I was just wondering, in your long years of scholarship, if you could relate the current phenomena we see in all of different problems and situations to some of the historical and geographical differences over these 210 years. In particular, one of the things which I see is that compared to, say, the Nepal territory versus Sikkim territory, the Sikkim Dehradun area is much more open to the outer world, right? So I would expect that the rate of diffusion of new ideas from things like potatoes and millet to new ideas, new identities, much faster, and that would have a direct effect on the rate of population growth, population density, and that itself would sort of start pushing social processes together. I was just wondering, because even now we see that the eastern Himalayas is a lot more open physically and now accessibly. If the current phenomenon which you describe, all of this diasporic idea stuff, is a function of this greater accessibility to newer ideas, creating greater population, greater political change, etc. Have you had a chance to think along that lines? And my knowledge is rather scrappy, and I was wondering if you could elucidate us on this. Thanks.
I haven't really compared these places across the borders so much, because the last time I visited Nepal for any good length of time was during 1990-91, when I spent almost 6 months. But I would think that we cannot really generalize in terms of openness and accessibility and acceptability of new ideas, etc., about a place. I think every place has people who have a lot of access to the various resources from across the world. They also are highly susceptible to the changing situations across the globe. But there are also people who want to hold on to certain established practices because they have vested interest in those. Usually, I think areas where there is more political stability have made more material progress. I won't say in terms of ideas, etc., but more material progress is seen, for instance, in Sikkim compared to Darjeeling. Darjeeling was leading, it was the center of Indian Nepali Renaissance for many years, but now it's nowhere. Sikkim has taken over in every sense, with this art, literature, music, whatever it is, or higher education. Darjeeling is nowhere because of the lack of political voice in the governance of that area.
I'll not get into any kind of summary. Just a couple of lines on what strikes me as I leave this hall after having heard Professor Subba. One is I'm glad that both Deepak and Rajendra raised the issue of the Nepalis of plains origin. That is the term that I think is most appropriate in terms of how does one look at them when we talk about Nepalis across the borders of Nepal. And I think the Nepalis of plains origin also will be impacted, as will be Nepalis of mountain and hill origin, if one of the fears of Professor Subba is played out, which has to do with the fact that his quote, "They need Nepal in times of crisis," is what they even today feel. Even while trying to sink roots, the Nepali speakers of the northeast, which is the his concentration was in the northeast in his presentation. So that, if there is a back flow, even if that is the right word according in the social sciences, if there is a back flow, the impact will be on Nepal, but first and foremost, and our concern should be that the impact will be on the lives and livelihoods of the Indian citizens of Nepali origin of whichever part of Nepal. I want to thank Professor Subba for his wisdom and his erudition that he has shared with us. I think he has provided a momentum to this conference. Thank you all in the audience. It's summer and it's already dark outside, and you're still here. Thank you all, and thank you, Professor Subba.